Girl, more wine. Zo 5 lore, and be quick. The snapped order, the casual contempt. It's how they all were. But Arya, she just swallowed it down. Luna's coughing fit echoed in her head. The specialist's bill a mountain she couldn't climb. They didn't know about Luna, her sister, or that Dr. Reed might actually save her. Not if Arya could just get the money. Then the bill arrived, 12 grand, not a cent of a tip. Something broke. "Excuse me, Mr. Sterling?" she asked, knowing full well she'd pay for it. She did. Sort of. Later, clearing the table, a heavy key card. Penthouse B. Prove me wrong. He had no clue. Her quiet kindness? It'll burn everything. Instead, when she goes to clear the table, she finds he's left her more than a tip. It's a key that could solve all her problems or unlock a world of danger she can't possibly imagine. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of what happens when you tell a billionaire that his money can't buy him manners. The Air in Aurelia, a 3 Michelin-star restaurant nestled in a discreet corner of Soho, was thick with the scent of white truffle and quiet money. For Arya Calloway, it mostly smelled like pressure. At 24, her life was a frantic ballet of balancing heavy trays, deciphering the mumbled orders of the city's elite, and mentally calculating how each meager tip chipped away at the mountain of debt that was her sister's medical care. Tonight, her station was graced by the presence of Damian Sterling. Even if you didn't know the name, you knew the type. He was the king of a pride of loud-pining Lions men in bespoke suits that cost more than her car, and women with diamonds that glittered like cruel tiny stars. Sterling himself was different. He sat at the head of the table, a portrait of bored omnipotence. His suit was a deep charcoal, his watch, a PC Filippi Calatrava, subtle but screaming its value to those who knew. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. His silence was a gravitational force, pulling the entire room into his orbit. He had a face that belonged on Roman currency, all sharp angles and imperial confidence. But his eyes, a startlingly cold shade of gray, held a deep, unnerving stillness. They swept over the staff, not as people, but as part of the decor. Arya had dealt with demanding customers before. It was the blood sport of fine dining. But Sterling's party was a masterclass in casual cruelty. One of his companions, a man with a booming laugh and a face flushed with expensive wine, snapped his fingers at her. Snap. The sound cut through the refined hum of the restaurant like a whip crack. "Girl, more wine. The Zo 5 Lauer, and be quick about it." Arya's jaw tightened, but her voice was pure honey. "Of course, sir." As she retrieved the bottle from the cellar, her phone buzzed in her locker. A text from her mom. "Luna's coughing again. The specialist in Baltimore wants to see her. They don't take our insurance." Arya closed her eyes, the weight of the world pressing down on her. The specialist was Dr. Evelyn Reed, a pioneer in experimental gene editing therapies for cystic fibrosis. It was Luna's only real hope, a distant, shimmering mirage that cost a fortune she didn't have. Every snap of the fingers, every dismissive wave, every paltry tip was a reminder of the chasm between her reality and the cure. Back at the table, the condescension had escalated. Another guest, a woman draped in silk, held up her half-eaten plate of risotto. "This is tepid," she announced to the table, though her words were aimed at Arya. "I expected better." Arya maintained her composure. "My sincerest apologies, madam. I can have the chef prepare another for you immediately." "Don't bother," she said with a dismissive flick of her wrist, as if Arya's offer was an inconvenience. Through it all, Damian Sterling watched. He hadn't said a word to her, but his gaze was a physical weight. He saw her absorb the insults, her smile never faltering, her posture never breaking. He watched her with a detached analytical curiosity, as if observing a curious specimen. The final straw came with the check. The bill was astronomical, over $12,000. The man who had snapped his fingers, drunk on bravado, in Bordeaux snatched the leather billfold. "Darmy, let me get this," he slurred, pulling out a black credit card. Sterling raised a hand, a gesture of quiet, indisputable authority. "I'll handle it." He didn't even look at the total. He simply laid his own card down. Arya took it, her fingers brushing the cool, heavy metal. When she returned, he was signing the slip. His friends were gathering their things, their laughter echoing with self-satisfaction. Arya stood patiently. He finished signing, pushed the billfold back towards her, and stood up. He hadn't left a tip, not a single cent on a $12,000 bill. It wasn't an oversight, it was a statement. It was a power play so blatant, so contemptuous that it sucked the air from her lungs. Her training, her need for this job, the ever-present image of Luna's pale face, it all screamed at her to say nothing, to just take the empty gesture and fade back into the wallpaper. But tonight, something inside her snapped. The exhaustion, the worry, the relentless humiliation, it all coalesced into a single reckless spark. As he turned to leave, she spoke, her voice low but clear, cutting through the post-dinner chatter. "Excuse me, Mr. Sterling." He paused, turning his head slightly. His eyes narrowed. He was not used to being addressed without invitation. "Was everything to your satisfaction tonight?" She asked the formal question, a stark contrast to the fire in her eyes. "It was adequate," he replied, his tone clipped bored. Arya took a small step forward. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "It's just that I've always been told that real class, real stature, isn't about the price of your wine or the brand of your watch." A hush fell over the departing group. They turned to stare, their expressions a mixture of shock and amusement. Who was this little waitress to lecture Damian Sterling? She met his cold gray gaze without flinching. "It's about how you treat people, especially the people you don't have to be nice to. I guess some things even billions of dollars can't buy." Her voice didn't waver. "Money can't buy manners." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. The boisterous friend looked ready to explode with indignation. The woman in silk gasped. Damian Sterling, however, did not react. His expression was unreadable, a mask of polished stone. For a long, terrifying moment, he just looked at her. He seemed to be dissecting her, peeling back the layers of her cheap uniform and her forced smile, looking for the source of this suicidal audacity. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, his entourage scrambling behind him like pilot fish after a shark. Arya stood frozen, the adrenaline draining away, leaving a cold, terrifying certainty that she had just been fired. She would have to call her manager, explain the inexplicable, and go home to tell her mom that Luna's last hope was now even further out of reach. Her body trembled as she reached for the billfold on the table, her professional instincts taking over even in her daze. But as her fingers closed around the leather, she felt something underneath it. It wasn't the crinkle of cash. It was hard, metallic, and cold. She lifted the billfold. Lying on the pristine white tablecloth was a single, heavy key card. It was matte black with no markings except for a silver stylized S in the center. Tucked beside it was a small folded piece of paper. Her hands shaking, she unfolded it. A single sentence was scrolled in sharp angular handwriting. "Penthouse B 157, West 57th. Prove me wrong." The taxi ride from Soho to her tiny shared apartment in Atoria was a blur of streetlights and existential dread. The key card felt like a block of ice in her pocket, a tangible piece of the surreal encounter. Penthouse B, 157 West 57th Street, Billionaire's Row. It wasn't just a different neighborhood, it was a different planet. Her roommate and best friend Chloe was on the couch, surrounded by textbooks and half-eaten takeout when Arya stumbled in. Chloe was the pragmatic anchor to Arya's often stormy sea, a nursing student who saw the world in diagnosis and treatments. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Chloe said, looking up. "Don't tell me Fingersnapper came back." Arya sank onto the lumpy armchair, the springs groaning in protest. She pulled the key card and the note from her pocket and tossed them onto the cluttered coffee table. Chloe picked them up. She read the note, her eyebrows shooting up into her hairline. She flipped the heavy key card over in her fingers. 157. "Arya, what is this? Did he proposition you?" "Worse," Arya whispered, her voice. "I insulted him to his face. In front of his friends, I told him he had no manners." Chloe stared at her, her jaw slack. "You did what? Are you insane?" You need that job. I know. I don't know what happened. I just snapped, Arya said, burying her face in her hands. He didn't leave a tip, Chloe. Not 1 cent. It was so degrading. And I was thinking about Luna and the specialist, and Chloe's expression softened from shock to concern. She sat on the arm of the chair and put a hand on Arya's shoulder. Okay, breathe. So you told off a billionaire. Honestly, good for you. But what does this key mean? Prove me wrong. Prove what wrong? That money can buy manners or that it can buy you? The unspoken question hung in the air between them, ugly and suffocating. The key wasn't an apology. It was a challenge. It was a test. Or it was the most arrogant high-stakes pickup line in history. This is sick, Chloe said, shaking her head. This is some kind of twisted game for him. He pushes you to your breaking point. And then when you show a spark of life, he dangles this in front of you. He's a predator, Arya. I know, Arya said, her voice muffled by her hands. I'm not going to go. Good, Chloe said firmly. You're going to call your manager tomorrow. Apologize profusely. Hope for the best. And if you get fired, we'll figure it out. We always do. You are not going anywhere near that building. But as the days turned into a week, the key card sat on Arya's dresser, a silent black temptation. She didn't get fired. Her manager, a perpetually stressed man named Jean-Pierre, never mentioned the incident. It was as if it had never happened, which was somehow more unnerving than being reprimanded. Damian Sterling had sealed the event in a tomb of his own influence. Meanwhile, reality was closing in. Another text from her mom, this time with a picture of a stack of bills stamped past due, a call from their landlord, his voice strained with false patience, and then the call that broke her. It was from the hospital. Luna had a bad episode, a severe pulmonary infection. She was stable, but the doctor's voice was grim. The standard treatments are becoming less effective, Mrs. Calloway. We really need to start considering more aggressive options. That night, Arya couldn't sleep. She sat in the dark, the city lights painting stripes across her floor, the key card heavy in her palm. Prove me wrong. Was he asking her to prove that not everyone has a price, or was he daring her to admit that they do? Chloe was right. He was a predator. This was a game. But Luna wasn't playing a game. Her fight was real, measured in labored breaths and hospital visits. Dr. Reed's experimental therapy in Baltimore wasn't just an aggressive option. It was a $250,000 miracle she couldn't afford. What if this key wasn't just a door to a penthouse? What if it was a door to a conversation? A chance, however slim, to appeal to the man behind the mask. Could she swallow her pride walk into the lion's den? Not for herself, but for Luna? The thought made her feel sick. It felt like a betrayal of the very principles she had stood up for. But then she pictured her sister's face, her smile that never quite reached her eyes, the faint blue tint to her lips after a coughing fit. What was pride compared to that? The next evening, she made a decision. She put on her nicest dress, a simple navy blue sheath dress she'd bought at a consignment shop. It was modest, professional. It was armor. She didn't do her hair or makeup any differently. She wasn't going there to seduce. She was going there to negotiate. With her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, she took the subway to Midtown. The 157 building loomed over the city like a monument to impossible wealth, its blue glass facade reflecting the twilight sky. Walking into the lobby felt like crossing into another dimension. The air was cool and silent, smelling of leather and fresh-cut flowers. A concierge in a perfectly tailored suit stood behind a marble desk, his expression polite but impenetrable. Arya's nerve almost failed her. She felt like a fraud, an imposter who was about to be forcibly ejected. She took a deep breath, walked to the private elevator bank reserved for residents, and held the black key card to the sensor. A green light blinked. The elevator doors slid open with a soft, expensive whoosh. Her hands were trembling as she stepped inside. There was only one button that would light up for her key PHB. She pressed it, and the elevator began its silent, impossibly smooth ascent into the sky. With every floor they passed, she felt like she was leaving a piece of herself behind, rising toward a fate she couldn't possibly predict. She was stepping onto the devil's doorstep, and she had no idea if he was home. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. There was no foyer, no hallway. One moment she was in a mirrored box, the next she was standing in a cavernous space that seemed to hang suspended over the whole of Manhattan. The apartment was a masterpiece of cold minimalist luxury, floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire space, offering a staggering 360-degree view of the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. The floors were polished white marble. The furniture was stark and architectural. Lowe's slung leather sofas in shades of black and gray glass tables and abstract metal sculptures that looked both priceless and dangerous. There wasn't a single photograph, not a book out of place, not a personal trinket. It wasn't a home, it was a showroom, a gallery curated by a man who appreciated value, but not warmth. It was beautiful, but it was sterile. It was the gilded Kishki key she had imagined. Arya stepped out of the elevator, her sensible heels clicking loudly in the oppressive silence. The doors slid shut behind her, leaving her alone with the city and the ghost of the man who owned it. She walked slowly, tentatively through the main living area, her reflection, a small, dark figure, moving across the vast, gleaming surfaces. She ran a hand along the back of a leather sofa. It was buttery soft and impossibly cold. On a massive, rough-hewn wooden table was a single object, an ancient-looking go-board. The black and white stones arranged in a complex, half-finished game. For what felt like an hour, nothing happened. Arya's initial adrenaline faded, replaced by a creeping unease. Had she misread the entire situation? Was this a joke? Was he watching her on a hidden camera, laughing at the little waitress wandering around his palace? She was just about to turn and press the elevator button to retreat back to her own world when she heard a sound from a darkened wing of the penthouse, the soft clink of ice against glass. He was here. She followed the sound down a long, gallery-like hallway lined with imposing dark canvases of abstract art. It led to a study, a room slightly more personal than the rest. One wall was a vast temperature-controlled wine cellar behind a sheet of glass. Another held shelves of what looked like first-edition books, all bound in severe dark leather. Damian Sterling was standing by a wet bar, his back to her, wearing a simple black cashmere sweater and dark trousers. He was pouring a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He didn't seem surprised to see her. "Malin, 25. He said, his voice a low rumble that filled the quiet room. He didn't turn around. "Would you like one?" "No, thank you," Arya said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I don't drink." "Of course not," he said, a hint of something mockery perhaps in his tone. He turned, leaning back against the bar, and finally looked at her. His gray eyes were just as golden analytical as they had been in the restaurant. But here, in his own space, they held a flicker of something else. Triumph. "So you came." He stated a simple fact. He took a slow sip of his scotch. "I wasn't sure you would. I had you pegged as a 70-30 probability. Pride is a powerful motivator, but desperation, I find, is usually stronger." His clinical assessment of her motivations was like a slap in the face. All her agonizing, her internal battle between pride and love for her sister, reduced to a statistic. "I'm not here for your money, Mr. Sterling," she said, her chin lifting. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Please don't insult my intelligence. Everyone who comes through that elevator is here for my money. They just have different ways of asking for it. You, I admit, have the most novel approach I've seen in years." He gestured with his glass to a leather armchair opposite a large mahogany desk. "Sit." It was a command, not an invitation. Arya remained standing. "I'm here because of your note. Prove me wrong. I'm here to prove that you were right about one thing. Money can't buy manners. But I'm also here to prove that it can do some good if the person who has it chooses to, that it doesn't have to be a tool for arrogance." He watched her, his head tilted slightly. A charity pitch, bold. "You walk into my home uninvited. You gave me the key," she interjected, her voice rising. "A test," he corrected smoothly. "A test which you have so far failed. You came. You're standing in my penthouse. You want something. The only question is how you'll frame it to maintain the illusion of your own moral superiority." The cold, calculated cruelty of his words was staggering, He was trying to break her, to force her into the mold of every other person he knew. He wanted her to beg. He wanted to prove that her defiance in the restaurant was a fluke, a performance. Arya took a breath, forcing the hot anger down. Losing her temper was what he wanted. "My sister is sick," she said, her voice dropping suddenly raw with emotion she hadn't intended to show. "Her name is Luna. She has cystic fibrosis. There's an experimental treatment, a doctor in Baltimore. It's her only real chance, and it costs more money than my family will see in 10 lifetimes. I'm not here asking for a handout. I'm asking for a loan. I will sign anything. I will work for the rest of my life to pay you back every single cent." She laid her heart bare, offering him the unvarnished, humiliating truth. She watched his face for any flicker of empathy, any sign of a human connection. There was nothing. His expression remained one of bored detachment. "No," he said simply. The word was so final, so absolute, it felt like a physical blow. Arya staggered back a step, her carefully constructed composure shattering. "No, just no. I don't run a charity, Miss Calloway, and I certainly don't give loans to waitresses who have a misplaced sense of grandeur," he said, placing his glass down on the bar. He walked toward his desk, his movements fluid and deliberate. "You see, I've learned a very expensive lesson in my life. The moment money is exchanged, it poisons everything. Relationships trust loyalty. They become transactions. I paid for my last fiancé's family debts, funded her brother's failed startup, bought her a life she could only dream of, and in return, she sold my company's secrets to my biggest competitor." He paused his back to her and looked out of the window at the sprawling city. "Her name was Elena, and she taught me that everyone has a price. The only variable is the number of zir." He turned back to her, his eyes now blazing with a cold fire. "So no, I will not give you a loan. I will not fund your sister's treatment. I will not be your white knight." Tears of frustration and shame welled in Arya's eyes, and she hated herself for them. She had gambled and lost spectacularly. She had sacrificed her last shred of dignity for nothing. Then why, she choked out, her voice breaking. "Why give me the key? Why bring me up here just to humiliate me?" He walked toward her, closing the space between them until he was standing just a few feet away. The sheer force of his presence was overwhelming. "Because I'm offering you a different kind of transaction," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur, one that is honest in its own way. No illusions of love or loyalty, no pretense of charity. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, which he'd slung over his desk chair. He pulled out a checkbook and a pen. "I will write a check to this Dr. Reed in Baltimore for the full amount. I will arrange for your sister and your family to be flown there on a private jet and put up in a suite at the Four Seasons for the duration of her treatment. I will cover every single expense. Her life will be saved." Arya's breath caught in her throat. It was everything she had dreamed of laid out before her, but she could feel the other shoe about to drop in exchange for what she whispered. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering proprietary. "In exchange for you," he said softly, "you will be my companion. You will attend events with me. You will travel with me. You will live here in this penthouse. You will be available to me whenever I want for whatever I want. No messy emotions, no talk of love. It's a simple contract. Your sister's life for your time." He smiled, a cold, sharp twisting of his lips. "I can't buy your manners perhaps, but let's see if I can buy your company." The words hung in the sterile air of the penthouse, more shocking than any insult, more intimate than any touch. Your sister's life for your time. It wasn't a proposition. It was a contract for ownership. He was offering to save Luna by putting Arya in a cave, albeit a gilded one. Arya's mind reeled. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to throw the offer back in his face and preserve what little was left of her soul. But the image of Luna gasping for breath was seared onto the back of her eyelids. How could she choose her own pride over her sister's next birthday? "You're disgusting," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and despair. "I'm honest," he corrected, unmoved. "I'm offering you exactly what you want with no hidden clauses. Isn't that better than the slow, bleeding hope of a loan you could never repay? Isn't it better than watching your sister fade away while you cling to a sense of propriety that the world doesn't reward? He was a monster, but he was a monster, speaking a terrible kind of truth. He had stripped the situation down to its brutal transactional core. "What if I say no?" she asked, the words tasting like ash. "Then you can see yourself out," he said with a shrug, turning back toward his desk as if the conversation was already over. "And I'll wish your sister the best of luck with her condition." The casual cruelty of it, the way he dangled Luna's life and then threatened to snatch it away, was the final push. In that moment, Arya understood that this was not a negotiation. It was a surrender. "Fine," she whispered. He stopped, turning back to her slowly. A flicker of something surprised satisfaction crossed his features before being instantly suppressed. "Fine, fine," she repeated, her voice stronger now, laced with a cold fury that matched his own. "I accept your terms, but I have some of my own." Now he looked genuinely intrigued. He leaned against his desk, crossing his arms. "This should be interesting." "First," Arya said, stepping forward, finding a strange strength in her defeat. "This is a contract. You said it yourself. So we're going to have one, a real one written by a lawyer. Your lawyer. It will state the exact terms. You will pay for everything related to Luna's treatment and recovery. In exchange, I will be your companion for a period of 1 year. I will attend public functions. I will travel with you when required. My time is yours." She took a breath, steeling herself for the next part. "But the contract will also state explicitly that this arrangement does not include a physical relationship. You are buying my company, Mr. Sterling, not my body." A long silence stretched between them. She expected him to laugh, to call her bluff, to tear up the imaginary contract. Instead, he studied her, his gray eyes narrowed in thought. He was reevaluating his specimen. "You're drawing a line in the sand after you've already surrendered the beach," he said quietly. "Why?" "Because my integrity is not for sale," she shot back. "You've bought my time, my freedom, my public face. You will not have anything else. That is my non-negotiable term." She held her breath, awaiting his verdict. This was the last piece of herself she could hold on to. If he took that, there would be nothing left. To her astonishment, a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It wasn't the cold, sharp smile from before. This one was different. It was laced with respect and something that looked unnervingly like amusement. "Done," he said. "A 1-year contract. All expenses for your sister covered. Your companionship platonic. I'll have my legal team, led by a man named Arthur Vance, draft the agreement tomorrow. You should have your own counsel review it." "I can't afford a lawyer," she said numbly. "I'll pay for that." "2," he said with a wave of his hand, as if swatting away a fly. "It's better for everyone if you are properly represented. We'll call it a signing bonus." The whole situation had spiraled into a realm of such absurdity that Arya could only stare at him. He was going to pay for her lawyer to review a contract to be his paid companion. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind. A black town car picked her up and took her to a glass and steel office in Midtown, where she met Arthur Vance, a kind elderly man with gentle eyes who looked at her with a profound, unspoken pity. He explained the contract, which was exactly as they had discussed. It was precise, ironclad, and utterly soulless. It stipulated her duties, her generous living allowance, a number that made her dizzy the duration, and the clear, unambiguous clause about the platonic nature of their arrangement. She was then taken to another law firm, one of her choosing from a list Vance provided, where a sharp, savvy lawyer named Miss Diaz reviewed the document and declared it the most bizarrely unethical document she had ever seen. Arya signed it. Her signature, usually a fluid script, was shaky and alien. She felt like she was signing her own soul away. The moment the ink was dry, Damian Sterling's efficiency was terrifying. A wire transfer was made to the clinic in Baltimore. A medical transport jet was scheduled. Her mother, crying with a mixture of joy and confusion, was on the phone talking about flight confirmations and hotel suites. Luna was going to get her chance. That evening, a high-end moving service dispatched by Sterling's office arrived at her Atoria apartment to pack her things. Chloe stood by her arms, crossed her face, a mask of worry and disapproval. "Are you sure about this, Ari?" she whispered as men in crisp uniforms carefully wrapped Arya's few worn possessions in tissue paper, preparing to transport them to a palace in the sky. This isn't right. There has to be another way. There isn't, Arya said, her voice hollow. She looked around the cramped apartment that had been her safe harbor. I have to do this, Chloe. For Luna, he's going to own you. He's going to own my schedule, Arya corrected, trying to convince herself as much as Chloe. The rest is still mine. But as she stepped back into the silent marble-floored penthouse, this time with her own suitcases being brought in by a silent staff member, she wasn't so sure. She had a new wardrobe curated by a personal shopper hanging in a walk-in closet the size of her old bedroom. She had a living allowance that could support her family for a decade, and she had a 1-year prison sentence ahead of her. That night, Damien came home late. He found her standing by the great windows, looking down at the city. She was wearing a pair of silk pajamas from her new wardrobe, feeling like a child playing dress-up. Your family arrived safely in Baltimore, he said, his voice startling her. Your sister is scheduled to begin her first round of treatment on Monday. Thank you, she said, not turning to look at him. He came to stand beside her close, but not touching the two of them reflected in the dark glass. Your first duty is on Friday, he said. The museum benefit at the Met. It's a black tire affair. Be ready at 7. He paused, then added, Welcome to your new life, Arya. He walked away, leaving her with the city lights and the chilling realization that she had gotten everything she had ever wanted for her sister. And the price was a gilded cage with him as the warden. Her surrender was complete. The question was, could she survive the year with her soul intact? Life inside the gilded cage was a masterclass in paradox. Arya woke each morning in a bed with sheets so fine they felt like cool water against her skin. The city's skyline, her silent, sprawling wallpaper. Yet a profound sense of dislocation settled over her like a fine layer of dust. The silence was the most unsettling part. In her old life, sound was constant. The clatter of plates, the rumble of the subway, Chloe's off-key singing in the shower. Here the only sounds were the whisper of the climate control system and the distant muted hum of a city she could see but no longer touch. It was an exquisite emptiness, a loneliness so profound it had a physical weight. Her days fell into a strange, unstructured rhythm. She'd read from the leather-bound classics that lined the study shelves, books that felt more like props than literature. She'd used the state-of-the-art gym, the treadmill facing a panoramic view of Central Park, running for miles but going nowhere. Meals were a solitary affair. A silent, unseen staff would leave perfectly prepared dishes for her on the marble island in the kitchen dishes she recognized from the menu at Aurelia. Each one a reminder of the life she'd traded, the one tethered to her old self. The one moment of pure, unadulterated joy was her daily video call with Luna. She would curl up on a vast white sofa, the city lights beginning to glitter behind her, and tap the icon on the tablet Damien had provided. Airy Luna's face would fill the screen, fuller and brighter than it had been in years. The persistent blue tint around her lips was gone, replaced by a healthy rosy glow. She was propped up on pillows in a luxurious hotel suite, a world away from her sterile hospital bed back home. Hey, Luna, Arya would say, her voice thick with emotion. Look at you. You're practically glowing. It's the fancy air. Luna would joke, her laughter less of a struggle, more of a true bubbling sound. Mom keeps ordering room service. I had lobster for lunch. Can you believe it? Their mother would lean into the frame, her face etched with a relief so deep it looked like exhaustion. She's doing so well, sweetheart. Dr. Reed said her lung function has improved by 15% already. It's a miracle, Arya. A true miracle. Tears would well in Arya's eyes as she listened to them talk about the treatments, about the kindness of the nurses, about the view from their window. She was looking at the real-world result of her Fuyan bargain. This joy, this health, this hope. This was what she had paid for. And as she smiled and laughed along with them, she felt the bars of her cage solidify, each one plated in the purest gold. After hanging up, the silence of the penthouse would rush back in louder than before, and she would wrap her arms around herself, fighting the chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Her relationship with Damien remained as sterile and remote as their surroundings. He was a phantom in his own home, Some mornings she would find a single used coffee cup by the machine, the only evidence he had been there at all. Their interactions were brief transactional necessities. An email from his assistant, Mr. Sterling, requires your presence at the winter ball Friday, 8 p.m., or a clipped verbal instruction from the man himself passing her in the grand hallway. We're dining with the board of Sumitomo tomorrow. Read the dossier. Be ready at 7. The first major event, the annual benefit at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, was her true baptism by fire. A team of stylists descended on the Penthouse, their efficiency both impressive and dehumanizing. They worked on her like sculptors on a block of marble, encasing her in a midnight blue gown of shimmering satin that felt both heavy and ethereal. They clasped a necklace of sapphires and diamonds around her throat, the stones so cold they felt like ice. When Arya looked in the mirror, she saw a stranger, a beautiful, polished, hollow-eyed work of art. Damien was waiting by the elevator, a breathtaking figure in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo. His gray eyes swept over her a slow, meticulous appraisal. He adjusted a stray lock of her hair, his fingers barely grazing her temple. But the touch was a lightning strike, a shocking point of human contact in their sterile world. Acceptable, he murmured, his voice a low rumble. In the back of the Maybach, the city streaking past in a blur of light, he handed her a slim tablet. Your homework. The screen displayed a sophisticated interface showing the gala's floor plan and guest list. It was a war map. The names and faces of the city's titans were all there. Tech moguls, political power, brokers, old money matriarchs. Tapping a face brought up a detailed profile, their business interests, their recent acquisitions, their personal scandals, and most importantly, their strategic value or threat to Sterling Holdings. You are not simply a beautiful woman on my arm tonight, Arya, he said, his tone devoid of warmth. You are a strategic asset. You will be charming. You will be intelligent. You will remember that Marcus Thorne is looking to offload his failing shipping division and that Beatrice Ader Livingston controls a key vote on the museum's expansion board. You will not under any circumstances mention your previous employment or the specifics of our arrangement. You are a family friend from a quiet old money background. You summer in the Hamptons and winter in Gustad. You are an art history major. Is that clear? You want me to lie? She stated, looking at the cold, hard screen. I want you to perform, he corrected, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. We are all performing, Arya. Life is a series of stages. This one just has better lighting. And a performance it was. The moment they stepped out of the car into a maelstrom of flashing cameras and shouted names, Damien's hand was on the small of her back, a gesture of both guidance and possession. Inside the great hall was a sea of jewels and ambition. For hours, Arya smiled until her face ached. She deployed the skills she hadn't realized she possessed, honed by years of serving the unservable. She could read the subtle tells of a person's face, the flicker of boredom in a CEO's eyes, the flash of insecurity in his wife's smile. She could navigate a conversation like a minefield, steering it away from dangerous topics and towards safe harbors of flattery and feigned interest. She charmed. She listened. She remembered names and details from the dossier. And she played the part of the adoring, enigmatic companion to perfection. The elite of New York were captivated. Damien Sterling's companions were usually headline-grabbing models or actresses who shone brightly but briefly. Arya was different. She had a quiet substance, a reserve that made them lean in, intrigued. And the way Damien watched her was different too. It wasn't the pining pride of a man showing off a trophy. It was the sharp, constant analytical focus of a grandmaster watching a key piece on the board. As they were leaving the formidable Beatrice Ader Livingston, a woman whose disapproval could sink careers intercepted them near the coat check. Damien, she said, her voice like gravel. I didn't think you had it in you. This one has substance. She turned her piercing, intelligent gaze on Arya. Where on earth did he find you, my dear? Before Arya could deliver her practiced lie, Damien answered, his voice smooth as silk. The same place one finds all rare and valuable things, Beatrice, by recognizing her worth when no one else could. The words were for Beatrice, but his eyes were on Arya, and for a fleeting, dizzying second, she felt he wasn't talking about the performance at all. This became their strange routine. Charity galas, opera premieres, private dinners on yachts. Arya was his constant shadow. In public, he was attentive, his hand always ready to guide her. In private, he was a ghost. They were two actors who shared a stage and then retreated to separate dressing rooms. Slowly, however, tiny cracks began to appear in the facade of their arrangement, usually in the quiet, unguarded hours of the night. She found him once in the study, staring at the half-finished game of Go on its heavy wooden table. "Who were you playing with?" she asked softly, her voice startling in the silence. He looked up, his eyes seeming to pull back from a great distance. "My grandfather," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "He passed away 5 years ago. This was our last game, unfinished." He touched one of the smooth black stones. He said, "Go teaches you more about strategy than any business school. To see the whole board, to anticipate your opponent's moves 10 steps ahead, to know when to sacrifice a stone to gain a larger advantage." He looked from the board to her, and a silent, chilling understanding passed between them. She was one of his stones, sacrificed for a larger goal she couldn't yet see. Another night she found him staring out the great window, a glass of untouched Macallan in his hand, a rare look of profound weariness on his face. "Does it ever get lonely?" she asked, emboldened by the darkness that made them both seem more human. "Up here above everything." He was silent for a long time. The city lights reflected in his eyes. "It's not lonely," he finally replied, his voice low. "It's safe. Betrayal can't climb this high." Arya understood. Then the penthouse wasn't a palace. It was a fortress, and he was its prisoner as much as its king. He had built a cage for himself long before he had ever put her in one. Imperceptibly, the dynamic between them began to shift. She started to see the man behind the carefully constructed monster, a man forged in the fires of betrayal, now terrified of the slightest warmth. He in turn began to see past the waitress he'd tried to break and the companion he'd bought. He saw a woman of fierce intelligence and an unshakable, if misplaced, loyal to loyalty not to him, but to the promise she had made for her sister. The true test of their strange alliance came unexpectedly at a chic gallery opening in Chelsea. The artist was a new sensation, and the room was thick with a heady mix of new money and old art. Elliot Winslow was there. He was Damien's chief rival, a man with a reputation for corporate savagery. And as Arya knew from the dossier, the very man his former fiancée, Elelanina, had sold his secrets to. Winslow, a viper in a Savile Row suit, cornered Arya while Damien was engaged with the gallery owner. "Miss Calloway," he began, his smile slick and predatory, "I've been hearing so much about you. You've certainly made an impression." Damien keeps his cards very close to his chest, but his choice in company. "Well, it speaks volumes," Mr. Winslow, Arya replied, her voice a cool, dismissive shield. "I know your story," he said, his voice dropping to an insidious whisper. He was so close she could smell his expensive, cloying cologne. "I have people who look into things for me. The waitress from Aurelia, the sister with the very expensive illness. It's a real Cinderella story, or perhaps more of a Fouillon bargain, wouldn't you say?" Arya's blood ran cold. He knew. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her body rigid, turning to leave. He stepped smoothly into her path, blocking her escape. "Oh, I think you do, and I think you're smart enough to know that a man like Damien Sterling doesn't do anything for free. He owns you. But here's the thing about assets. They can be flipped for a profit." He slipped a heavy, sleek business card into her hand, her fingers closed around it out of pure reflex. "My offer would be far more generous than his. A trust fund for your sister that would make his contribution look like pocket change. A life of your own, no strings attached, no performance required. All I value is information. An early tip on a sterling acquisition, a whisper of a new patent. Think about it. Think about what real freedom tastes like." Just then, Damien appeared at her side. His arrival was like a sudden drop in atmospheric pressure. He didn't look at Winslow. He looked only at Arya, his gray eyes searching her face, then flicking down with lethal precision to the black card clutched in her hand. "Is there a problem here?" Damien asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "A silken thread." "Not at all," Winslow said with a triumphant smirk. "Just making a new friend. Always a pleasure, Arya. He sauntered away, leaving a toxic silence in his wake. Damien's eyes were like chips of ice. The mask was back colder and harder than ever before. Arya could practically see the calculations whirling in his mind, the old wounds ripped open and bleeding. He was seeing Elena all over again. He was seeing the inevitable, predictable betrayal he had paid to avoid, but always expected. "Give me the card," he commanded, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. This was it, the precipice, the moment that would define everything. She could see the path he expected her to take, the path of lies, denial, and self-preservation, the path Elena had taken. Instead, she looked him directly in the eye, into the heart of his frozen fortress. She didn't hand him the card. With a deliberate, steady movement, she tore it in half, then in quarters, and let the pieces fall to the polished concrete floor like bitter confetti. "My loyalty isn't to you, Damien," she said, her voice low and fierce, using his first name with a new defiant intimacy. "It never has been. My loyalty is to my word. I gave my word that I would do this for 1 year to save my sister's life." She took a step closer, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Elliot Winslow has nothing to offer me because I am not for sale. Not to you and not to him. My soul was never part of our contract." She had expected anger, suspicion, a cold cross-examination. Instead, for the second time since she'd met him, she saw Damien Sterling look genuinely, utterly stunned. He stared from her defiant face to the pieces of the card on the floor and back again. The impenetrable ice in his eyes began to crack to thaw, replaced by something she couldn't name, something fragile and unfamiliar and overwhelmingly powerful. He said nothing. He simply took her arm, his grip firm, but no longer proprietary, and led her from the gallery, their performance for the night officially and irrevocably over. As they rode up the silent elevator, it didn't feel like a retreat into their separate corners of the cage. The air between them was charged different. For the first time, it felt like something other than a transaction. It felt like the beginning of a truce. So was it a fairy tale ending? Not in the way we expect. Their story wasn't about a prince saving a porpoise. It was about two broken people trapped in cages of their own making who found an unexpected key in each other. Arya's defiance didn't just win her sister a chance at life. It challenged a powerful man to see beyond the transactional world he had built around himself. She proved that integrity has a value that can't be listed on a stock exchange. Theirs is a story that reminds us that the greatest currency we possess is our character, and the most valuable connections are the ones that money can't buy. But that honesty against all odds can build. If this story of unexpected connection and moral courage moved you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who loves a powerful story, and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss the next real-life drama we unfold.